The fear of snakes is perhaps the most common phobia on Earth, and it seems understandable. Some of them are lethal, so fearing snakes is just a genetically ingrained instinct of survival in our brains. However, it would be unfair to label snakes solely as predators. They are also amazing creatures with incredible abilities and appearances, capable of evoking a wide range of emotions, but certainly leaving no one indifferent. In our story today, we'll talk about a rare snake that suddenly attacked its owner, ending his life. Ben Renick was just 29 years old when he was found deceased in his renowned snake breeding facility. Benjamin Blue Birch Renick was born in August 1987 in Missouri. He grew up in the countryside alongside his family. Ben had an older brother, Sam, with whom he shared a very close bond. In 1989, the Renick family moved to a picturesque farmhouse. The boys spent a lot of their time outdoors, and it was then that Ben began to take an interest in snakes. A tragic incident in September 1992 triggered a series of unfortunate events. The family was away when a gas leak occurred, leading to an explosion in their beautiful home. The Renicks were forced to move into a trailer. After some time, Ben's mother, Kim, was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. Despite these hardships, the family overcame. They were very close-knit and always supported each other in any situation. Recovering from previous tragedies in 2002, they moved to a new home where a special room was designed for Ben to keep his snakes. In 2009, after a long battle with cancer, Kim passed away. Before her death, she made her sons promise to look after the farm and pass it on to their children. As time went by, Ben's love for snakes knew no bounds, and the young man founded Renick Reptiles, which soon gained recognition. This allowed him to sell snakes worldwide from the United Kingdom to Japan. Breeding snakes became the meaning of his life. He was described as a great breeder who was devoted to his work, caring more about the snakes than the money. The reptile farm bred a multitude of reptilian subspecies, growing and reproducing both the most common species and some of the rarest subspecies on Earth. Ben's reptiles were of immense value. Just a portion of his pie farm collection was valued at over $1 million. However, Ben was lonely and had long dreamed of starting a family. So in 2010 at a party, he met a woman named Lindley. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and within weeks, Ben introduced his girlfriend to his brother Sam and Sam's fiancé Eli. Eli and Lindley had sons from previous relationships, so they quickly found common ground and became friends. Lindley swiftly became part of the Renick family, and they started living together. She assisted Ben on the snake breeding farm. They were in love and lived as a full family even before they made their union official. In March 2012, Lindley gave birth to a daughter, Amelia. Ben was overjoyed to become a father. However, the happy family life once again encountered problems. Frank Renick, Ben's father, encountered significant troubles in his business. Previously, he had engaged in several fraudulent stock transactions to cover medical bills and Kim's treatment. Just a day before the FBI planned to visit the farm, Frank took his own life. Frank's passing halted the investigation. The sons were deeply affected by yet another parental loss, but managed to get through it, coming together and supporting one another once more. Ben inherited the house and farm, while Sam received a sum of money far exceeding the house's value. Each brother had his own family and children, but this never prevented them from living as one big family in their parents' home. They lived together, and Sam, without hesitation, spent his inheritance on repairing the farm. Initially, everything was fine, but soon financial disputes caused a rift between the brothers. After their father's death, Ben focused on his business and his family. He decided to formalize his relationship with Lindley. On April 14, 2014, they married, making Lindley a full-fledged member of the Renick household. Lindley and Ben opened a second business, a spa called Essentia Spa Inc. But the business Lindley managed faced financial difficulties. Ben and Lindley often argued about finances. Lindley worked hard, but not enough to cover the salon's expenses. At the same time, Sam and his wife also faced financial challenges. Ben allowed them to sell some of the furniture in the house. Lindley disapproved, leading to a rift between the families. The relationship was irreparably damaged. Ben decided to improve the family's financial situation by arranging to sell some rare reptiles for a significant sum. However, the deal fell through due to a tragedy that occurred on the farm. On June 8, 2017, Lindley walked into one of the farm's barns. There, on the floor in a pool of blood, laid Ben. Lindley called his brother Sam for help and dialed the emergency number. She reported that she had found her husband unconscious on the ground. During the conversation, Lindley dropped the phone and ran outside. Sam continued the conversation and confirmed that his brother was dead. Sam suggested that a snake might be to blame for what had happened. Montgomery County Sheriff's deputies were called to the snake breeding facility. For the first time in a long while, law enforcement officers were afraid to enter the farm, facing the prospect of encountering over 3,000 snakes and conducting an examination of a man lying in blood, wary of a possible attack from a deadly viper believed to be the assailant. However, when Coroner Dave Colbert arrived and took a closer look, he discovered a shell casing on a shelf at eye level. This was something far more sinister than a venomous snake bite. Shell casings were found near the body, but no weapon was discovered. The assailant had shot Ben multiple times in the back and head. None of the relatives heard shots or saw the attacker. Sam and Lindley were taken to the sheriff's office for questioning. Lindley suggested that Sam might be involved in their husband's death, even citing a motive. Apparently, Ben wanted to sell the house, but Sam was opposed. Sam was asked to undergo a lie detector test, which he passed. The police had no reason to detain Lindley and Sam, so they were released. The investigation into who might have wanted Ben Renick dead began. Various theories were proposed, the first being robbery, but it remained unconfirmed as none of the rare snakes were missing, and all valuable items remained untouched. Just days after the demise of Ben Renick, police interrogated Lindley. They tested her hands and clothing for gunpowder residue, but the results came back negative. Following her husband's funeral, Lindley ceased communications with Sam and Eli. She sold her husband's business, inherited the house, and sought to claim a life insurance payout for Ben worth $1 million. After receiving the insurance money, Lindley planned to sell the Renick family home for $740,000. Sam's family was notified about the eviction. Upon discovering the rapid insurance claim and business sale following her husband's passing, Sam Renick suspected his brother's wife in the tragic event, sharing his suspicions with investigators. Lindley was called in for another interrogation. There, she admitted to having complex relations with Ben and occasionally meeting with a man named Arik. Arik had an alibi, so he was excluded from the list of suspects. Lindley's admissions were startling. It turned out, about 3 years after their marriage was officially registered, she was unfaithful to Ben, with at least 2 different men. Messages between the couple showed that Ben suspected his wife of infidelity, which had indeed strained their relationship lately. On October 5, 2017, the Missouri State Highway Patrol conducted a polygraph test on Lindley, informing her that she had failed. However, without solid evidence linking her to the crime, she was released. Nevertheless, the investigation into Ben Renick's case slowed but did not cease. Later, investigators learned that a month before Ben Renick's passing, Lindley had made her first attempt on his life. She concocted a story of Ben being a cruel tyrant who oppressed her daily and even physically assaulted her. She shared this story with a spa salon co-worker to garner support and assistance. They plotted to end Ben's life by giving him a poisonous protein shake laced with 15 Percocet pills. Unaware, Ben drank it. He fell severely ill during that period but survived, oblivious to the fact that he had been poisoned. Lindley Renick was interrogated by investigators 6 times in total. Further assistance in the investigation came unexpectedly. On January 14, 2020, information from a state prison surfaced, with a witness claiming to have knowledge about Ben Renick's demise. The witness was Brandon Blackwell. He told Missouri State Highway Patrol investigators that Lindley had shot Ben and had conspired with her ex-boyfriend. Brandon mentioned that he had dated Lindley while she was married to Ben. 1.5 years after Ben's death, they had a child together, but by 2019, they had separated. Brandon claimed that Lindley confessed the act to him. She had conspired with her spa salon co-worker, Ashley Shaw, and another ex-boyfriend, Michael Humphrey. Years after Ben's demise, Lindley Renick and her former boyfriend, Michael Humphrey, were arrested for Ben's death. However, following their arrest, Lindley and Humphrey pointed fingers at each other. So who really pulled the trigger? According to Michael's testimony, on the day of the event, he went to the farm with Lindley, who asked him to pose as a buyer. He put on gloves and was supposed to shoot Ben, but couldn't do it. Eventually, Lindley took the gun and shot her husband herself. The investigation into Ben Renick's death continued for 3 long years. On January 16, 2020, arrest warrants were issued for Lindley Renick, Michael Humphrey, and Ashley Shaw. Ashley was offered immunity in exchange for her cooperation, and she testified against her boss. The former spa salon employee shared that Lindley had complained about her husband and convinced her to assist in a plan. She claimed that Ben was constantly belittling, demeaning, and even physically harming her. Fearing divorce would lead to Ben gaining custody of her children, Lindley decided to eliminate him, planning together to poison him with a lethal cocktail. During questioning, Lindley and Michael accused each other of Ben's demise. In October 2021, Michael Humphrey faced trial in Audrain County. His lawyers hoped that revealing the murder weapon would lead to a second-degree murder charge. Despite possessing the gun, no conclusive DNA evidence was found on it. To lessen his sentence, Michael Humphrey also made a deal with the prosecution, disclosing the location of the murder weapon. His cooperation led to a life sentence on a less severe charge of second-degree murder, without defense at the trial. On January 3, 2021, Michael Humphrey was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. The trial against Lindley Renick began on December 6, 2021. She was charged with the shooting and demise of Ben Renick on June 8, 2017, at his snake breeding facility in New Florence. Court documents stated that the plot to end Ben Renick's life originated in Lindley's spa salon. The probable cause statement mentioned that Ben was aware of Lindley's financial troubles and that Lindley feared Ben could take her children away, leading her to fabricate a story of domestic abuse. The first attempt to end Ben Renick involved a protein shake laced with narcotics. Search warrants for Ben and Lindley Renick's Facebook accounts confirmed the protein shake story and Ben's awareness of Lindley's financial issues. The court hearing detailed the events of the day Ben Renick was killed, fully reconstructing the sequence of events through cross-examination. On the day of the incident, Michael Humphrey picked up Lindley from the spa salon, while Shaw sent text messages from Lindley's phone inside the spa to conceal their true location and mislead the investigation. According to court documents, Humphrey intended to end Ben's life, but asked Lindley to do it. After firing shots, Humphrey collected most of the casings, but missed some in his haste. He also disposed of Lindley Renick's clothing after returning to the spa, where Lindley took a shower, which helped avoid detection of gunpowder residue on her hands and clothes on the day of the incident. Defense attorney Catherine Berger asked Lindley Renick to share her personal and family history, education in massage therapy, relationship with ex-boyfriend Michael Humphrey, work history, and the lead-up to her marriage with Ben Renick, portraying the suspect as a victim of domestic violence. However, no evidence of such violence was found, undermining this defense narrative. Michael Humphrey was part of a group that allegedly planned to end Ben Renick's life. Lindley Renick described her relationship with Humphrey as codependent, involving his drug dealing and her addiction. Lindley Renick ended her relationship with Humphrey at the end of 2010. According to previous witness statements, she reconnected with him about a month before Ben Renick's death. Lindley Renick denied the prosecution's allegations related to the supposed plans to end Ben Renick's life, including the alleged failed attempt to poison Ben with a protein shake containing narcotics. The couple was experiencing both financial and marital difficulties. The spa center was failing, and contractual deals for selling snakes had yet to yield financial benefits. In court, Lindley admitted to having extramarital relationships with various men, for which she expressed deep regret. By the time Lindley considered discussing divorce, she was unsure who to turn to, given her father's divorce history and his firm views on divorce and affairs. Wanting someone to support her in her conversation with Ben, she reached out to past boyfriends, leading to a reconnection with Michael Humphrey. During cross-examination by the prosecution, Lindley admitted to willingly participating in her husband's death and intentionally concealing Michael Humphrey's involvement. Due to marital difficulties, including disputes, alleged physical and sexual abuse by Ben, and the stress associated with his snake breeding business, Lindley feared him and was concerned about his mood when she would bring up the topic of divorce on June 8, 2017. Hence, she brought Michael Humphrey to the farm that day. She claimed her presence at the farm was not to end her husband's life, but to request a divorce. Lindley said she took some trash from Ben to dispose of. Then she entered the nursery, where she saw Humphrey and Ben finishing washing their hands. Lindley recounted not being able to hear their conversation, focused more on how to tell Ben she wanted a divorce. Lindley's voice trembled as she described seeing Humphrey draw a pistol and shoot her husband. I screamed and ran outside. Then I heard a few more shots, everything went numb, and I remember just staring at the trees and Michael as he ran up to me and pushed me towards the car, Lindley testified in court. Reality hit when she returned to the snake breeding facility and discovered Ben's body. Lindley called Ben's brother Sam, who arrived. They checked for a pulse and whether Ben was breathing, thinking he might still be alive. Lindley expressed regret for not telling the police then and there that she had been at the breeding facility earlier with Michael Humphrey and not sharing her version of events. As she was suspected in her husband's death, the life insurance policy Ben Renick had taken out years earlier could mean a payout of $1 million. Lindley waived her rights to this money. Ben Renick became the beneficiary of a trust after his father's death. His assets went to Ben Renick and his children, not Lindley. Nonetheless, Lindley received money she had contributed to the trust and a scholarship for her daughter. Lindley confessed she sought support, so she shared her version of events with her then-boyfriend Brandon Blackwell. However, that relationship ended as soon as Lindley had Brandon's child. During the court hearing, Lindley shared her regrets about her continuous deception. "I was just trying to escape from the truth of what happened," she said, adding that she never wished for her husband's death. Lindley Renick's defense team did not petition for a new trial following the final verdict. No appeals were filed against her conviction. Lindley Renick filed a defamation lawsuit against Blackwell, claiming his statements about her involvement in her husband's death were false. However, prosecutor Kevin Zellner questioned Lindley Renick's testimony during cross-examination. He queried why she did not check on her husband after hearing gunshots, why she did not call 911, why she sent friendly messages to him and Humphrey after the shooting, and why she continued to lie even as emergency responders got involved. Renick admitted to suggesting the police consider Ben's brother as a suspect. Often tearful and somber during her testimony, prosecutor Zellner portrayed her as a mastermind, albeit a clumsy one. He described her as cruel enough to accuse the deceased's brother, saying during his rebuttal, "Do you know how cold your heart is?" During the sentencing for second-degree murder and armed criminal action, Lindley Renick broke down. She did not admit her guilt. On December 9, 2021, she was found guilty of second-degree murder. The 33-year-old Lindley Renick was sentenced to 13 years for murder and an additional 3 years for armed criminal action. In January, Judge Kevin Crane handed down a total sentence of 16 years. The sentence outraged Sam and other relatives of Ben. They believed that Michael and Lindley deserved life imprisonment, as they were both as guilty as any other co-conspirators. Sam Renick's final words expressed complete disappointment. He was astonished that the life of a person in Missouri could be valued at just 13 years. Ben Renick was a young man full of hope, with a potentially bright future. Due to the actions of one woman, he and Sam found themselves in a difficult situation, now unable to mend their relationship. Yet, the great snake breeder, Ben Renick, continues to live on in a way he would surely have appreciated. He became famous for breeding a new snake species named after him. The reptile community was shaken by Ben Renick's death and wanted to help. They collected and donated money to support Ben's family. Ben's valuable snakes were dispersed and sold to various reptile experts and enthusiasts, while the main snake in Ben's life was sentenced to 13 years. And we may never truly know who actually pulled the trigger, as this story is filled with the lies of the most vile and despicable reptile, Renick Case. The case of Austin Harrouff, a handsome, honor student, athlete, and cannibal. Can a young, physically healthy, and strong man suddenly lose his mind, turning into a wild beast? And if such a transformation does occur, where should one search for the root cause of this drastic change? Experts believe that such mental disorders are often hereditary, can be the result of traumatic experiences, substance abuse, or social isolation. Austin Harrouff's case stands out. It's not just a sudden bout of madness, a wild frenzy, or a personality disorder. Medical professionals have classified his condition as clinical delirium of lycanthropy, and the press has dubbed him a cannibal. It's believed that the young man suffers from a rare psychiatric syndrome where the patient believes they are transforming into an animal. However, the families of the victims, both injured and deceased from his transformations, are convinced that Harrouff feigned insanity to avoid accountability. Harrouff himself did not hide the fact that he had been consuming various narcotics and psychotropic drugs for a long time, but examinations showed he was clean at the time of committing the heinous acts. Now let's delve into this complex case from the beginning and trace how the scion of a wealthy and respected family, an honor student, and an athlete turned into a drug-dependent madman with an uncontrollable desire to taste human flesh. The golden boy Austin Malcolm Harrouff was born on December 21st, 1996, in the picturesque resort town of Palm Beach, Florida, and was the eldest of two children in a wealthy and respected family of doctors. His father was a renowned dentist with a network of private dental clinics, while his mother was a leading pharmaceutical specialist. The Harrouffs lived in a large, luxurious home by the ocean. A year and a half after Austin's birth, the family welcomed a younger child, a daughter named Haley. From a young age, the siblings were very close, calling each other best friends. Despite their privileged upbringing, it didn't mean the children were spoiled. Their parents ensured they received a quality education and supported their holistic development and creative potential. Austin was a straight-A student in school, passionate about playing the guitar, seriously engaged in wrestling and football, and performed in an amateur theater group. He considered himself creative and ambitious. Along with his parents and sister, Austin traveled the world, spending his vacations in new places each time. In an essay written during his high school years, Austin described himself as a happy and optimistic person, with a vivid imagination capable of conjuring anything he pleased. He also mentioned his perseverance in striving for excellence in academics and sports. However, he acknowledged his shyness as a weakness, which sometimes made it difficult for him to interact with peers. When Austin turned 13, his parents decided to separate. His father left the family home to his ex-wife and moved into an equally luxurious residence with his new love interest, who soon became his wife. The children stayed with their mother, but their father remained actively involved in their upbringing and provided financial support. Soon, his mother also found a new partner, marrying him within a year, and he moved into their home. The teenage boy struggled with his parents' divorce, but it's worth noting that his emotional turmoil did not affect his academic performance or athletic achievements. Dreaming of a career in medicine to follow in his parents' footsteps, Austin aspired to help and save lives, aiming to gain admission to a prestigious college specializing in medical studies, an honor student and social outcast. In high school, Austin transformed into a true heartthrob. He grew tall, reaching 6 feet 2 inches, boasted a muscular build, and was quite strong. His charming smile and innocent open gaze gave him an almost angelic appearance. However, Harrouff remained the same shy guy, which hindered his ability to socialize with peers and form romantic relationships with girls. In his personal diary, which he kept during his teenage years, he wrote about having almost no friends in school, as all his classmates labeled him a nerd and mocked him. The young man also expressed hope that everything would change for the better when he went to college, changed his social circle, and moved out of his parents' house. A few months before finishing high school, Austin discovered he had been admitted to the prestigious University of Florida's 4-year medical program. Successful completion of this program would open wide career prospects for him in the future, as well as the opportunity to continue his education at any medical school in the United States. The student was incredibly happy, as his dream had come true. Towards the end of August, his parents drove him to the college campus, where he was to begin his studies. Opening up in a vlog, Austin embarked on the independent adult life he had eagerly awaited, yet little changed for him. Due to his shyness, he still struggled to connect with peers. He briefly dated a lovely girl, but they soon parted ways because, as she put it, something about his behavior alarmed her, leading her to end the relationship. In his freshman year, Harrouff took a serious interest in bodybuilding, spending a lot of time in the gym and achieving impressive results. The young man developed steel muscles that looked very impressive. However, his success was not solely the result of perseverance and hard work. Steroids, which he began using regularly, also played a role. He openly shared this in his vlog on YouTube, which he started in the spring of 2016. Austin posted various videos on his channel. Some discussed sports and bodybuilding in particular. Others featured him singing with a guitar, doing cover versions of popular hits, or mimicking famous artists by copying their performance style. Still, others were about himself and his philosophical musings on life. Over time, however, his postings became increasingly alarming. The young man started urging his followers never to use steroids, claiming they could drive a person insane. He also said he had a crazy and normal side, and was confused by them. Austin began recording videos speaking in different accents, as if they were different people, sometimes changing the tone of his voice, or he could burst into tears mid-recording for no apparent reason. His mood and facial expressions also underwent strange transformations, at times appearing as if he was just making faces at the camera. Later, experts who reviewed his postings concluded that in each one, the young man was virtually pleading for help. For him, this blog became the only outlet and a way to express his feelings, as he failed to make any real friends during his studies. Moreover, these video recordings traced how the student gradually lost his sanity, with his behavior becoming more sensational, provocative, and even aggressive. Austin's subscribers suspected he was using some controlled substances and recorded his videos under their influence. They directly asked him about this in the comments, but he replied that it's unhealthy, and as an athlete, he would never use drugs. However, his behavior suggested otherwise, and one of the subscribers even speculated that Harrouff might have a dissociative identity disorder. What's wrong with Austin? When Austin returned home for the summer break, his mother and sister, who hadn't seen him in almost a year and hadn't watched his blog online, were literally shocked by the changes in him during that time. Austin had undergone a significant physical transformation, turning into a veritable mountain of muscle, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. He became odd in every sense, speaking nonsense and claiming he no longer needed sleep. Initially, his family didn't take his words seriously until the night came. Austin declared he would patrol the house, guarding his family's peace from some dark forces. And he indeed kept his promise, wandering around the house until morning. Moreover, every hour, he would check on his mother and sister's rooms, loudly assuring them they could sleep peacefully because he was on duty. The next morning, his mother decided to have a frank conversation with her son and directly asked him if he was using any drugs. Austin candidly admitted that he had tried virtually all drugs over the past year and even described how each one affected him. Among other things, he had taken a potent synthetic drug that caused severe hallucinations, fits of rage, and could lead to a fatal overdose. Nevertheless, he swore to his mother that it was all in the past, and he no longer touched the poison that drove him insane. After hearing her son out, Mrs. Harrouff made what was perhaps the main mistake. She did not seek help from qualified professionals, deciding she could help her son cope on her own. Being an experienced pharmacist, she took matters into her own hands. She gave her son a sedative and a sleeping pill, thinking it would help him relax and fall asleep after a sleepless night. However, Austin, after dozing off for just a couple of hours, was back on his post by night. He resumed patrolling the house until morning, informing its inhabitants every hour that all was quiet, and there was no need to worry. This went on for several weeks, but the mother still refused to involve psychiatrists or even inform her ex-husband about the situation. Early on the morning of August 13th, Austin knocked on the door of a former classmate living a few blocks from him. The girl was quite surprised since they hadn't seen each other in over a year, and he hadn't warned her of his visit. When she asked the reason for his appearance, Austin said he had forgotten what year he was born and urgently needed this information. The puzzled classmate answered that it was in 1996, after which the young man abruptly turned around and left without a word. Austin's stunt scared and puzzled the girl, so she immediately called Mrs. Harrouff and told her everything, asking if the boy might be using prohibited substances. Only then did the woman decide to call her ex-husband, who was working in another state, and shared her concerns that something was seriously wrong with their son. The boy's father flew to Florida the next day and, after talking with his son, suggested he voluntarily check into a clinic for an examination, to which the young man categorically refused. Then the man had a heart-to-heart conversation with his ex-wife, and together they decided to send their son for compulsory examination and subsequent treatment in a drug rehabilitation or psychiatric facility. However, they were unable to do so in time. A disturbing confession. The next day, Austin's friends invited him to join them at the beach, given the hot and sunny weather. His mother insisted that Haley go along to keep an eye on her brother. Austin was excited about the outing but dressed unusually warm for the beach, as if heading to the mountains instead. He wore a thick athletic hoodie with long sleeves, matching pants, boots, and ski goggles. When his friends saw him dressed like that, they were initially silent, then burst into laughter a few seconds later. They teased Austin, asking why he was dressed that way and if everything was okay with him. Austin became seriously angry, shouting that if they thought he was crazy, then he would act accordingly and end one of their lives. The boys didn't take his words seriously, but backed off just to be safe. Haley noticed her brother was on the verge of a breakdown, so she decided to talk to him and calm him down. During their conversation, unheard by the others, Austin told his sister that he wasn't entirely human, but half wild animal, immortal, and possessed superhuman strength. His words frightened her, but she tried to remain calm to avoid provoking aggression from her brother. At the beach, Austin acted completely normal and natural. He joked, laughed, played volleyball with friends, and goofed around. As evening approached, they said their goodbyes, and everyone went their separate ways. Austin and Haley headed towards a small restaurant near the coast where they planned to meet their father and his current wife. On the way, Austin told Haley he intended to test his immortality, then headed towards a busy highway, planning to cross it inappropriately, directly through the fast-moving traffic. When Haley realized what was happening, she ran after her brother and physically dragged him away, begging him to hurry because they were expected. Austin agreed that they shouldn't make anyone wait, and silently followed his sister. At dinner, Austin behaved oddly again, silently getting up from the table several times to go outside, looking around as if he feared someone, then returning. He then decided to tell his father and stepmother about his immortality. When his father calmly suggested seeking professional help, Austin jumped up, shouted that he wasn't insane, shoved his father hard, and ran out of the restaurant. Attack on an elderly couple and their neighbor. What unfolded after the young man left the restaurant could be straight out of a horror movie. He later claimed to have no memory of the events and couldn't believe he was capable of such brutality. Austin walked several miles until he wandered into an unfamiliar neighborhood. There, the bright light from an open garage drew his attention, and he made his way towards it. In that home lived an elderly couple, 59-year-old John Stevens and 56-year-old Michelle Mishcon Stevens. In the evenings, they enjoyed barbecuing and watching movies in their spacious garage. Set up like a living room, they had been married for over a quarter of a century, had 3 adult children living on their own, and were now enjoying their retirement and each other's company. That evening, John went for a walk with their dog while his wife prepared everything for their usual movie night. When Michelle saw an unfamiliar young man on their lawn, she felt no threat and even asked if he needed help. But the situation took an unexpected turn. The couple's neighbor, Jeffrey Fisher, lived across the street and was on friendly terms with the Stevens. Around 9 in the evening, he heard suspicious noises outside. Looking into the yard, he suddenly heard Michelle's agonizing scream. Without hesitation, he rushed to help his neighbors and saw a tall, large young man attacking the elderly woman by the open garage. Jeffrey tried to pull the stranger away, but the young man was overpoweringly strong, knocking Jeffrey to the ground. As he tried to recover, the assailant stabbed him several times in the back and shoulder. Realizing he was overpowered and needed help, Jeffrey ran into the Stevens house to draw the attacker's attention away from himself, and after exiting through the back door, headed to his own home. Only once inside did he realize the assailant had not followed him, but returned to the unfortunate Michelle. Jeffrey immediately called the police and emergency medical services, reporting an armed attack by a stranger with a knife and that he had been injured along with his elderly neighbor. After speaking with emergency services, Jeffrey fell silent, listening intently. Soon, he was convinced no one was outside his door, and the attacker had stayed at the neighbor's home. Moreover, the assailant was now making strange, animal-like sounds, similar to the growling of a wild beast, accompanied by screams of terror and moans. Fatal assault and gruesome act. It took the police about 10 minutes to arrive at the scene, but by then, it was tragically too late. The sight that greeted them was horrifying and beyond any logical explanation. 2 officers approached the garage, weapons drawn, only to freeze in disbelief at the doorway. There, in a pool of blood, lay the lifeless body of the homeowner, Michelle Mishcon Stevens. The autopsy later revealed she suffered multiple blunt force traumas to the head and a stab wound to the chest. A bit further in the dim light, 2 more individuals were on the ground, but it took a moment for the officers to process the scene. One man reached out, pleading for help in a strained voice. Above him was another man, seemingly choking him, gripping his neck with one hand and tilting his head back with the other. The officers demanded the attacker release the victim, threatening with their guns. But he showed no reaction. Firing was too risky due to the chance of hitting both individuals. Instead, one officer pulled out a taser, warned he was about to use it, and moved closer. Only then did he see the assailant was not just attacking, but actually biting the man's face, holding his head and neck firmly. The victim, as you might have guessed, was John Stevens. Beneath him spread a vast pool of blood. His left cheek was missing a chunk of flesh, and his lip, nose, and ear were also mutilated and seemingly chewed off. The elderly man was immobilized, barely able to move, silently begging for help. The officer shocked the attacker with the taser, but he seemed unaffected, continuing to tear at the victim's face with his teeth. A kick to the assailant's face only made him growl loudly and bite into Stevens's cheek again. Subsequent kicks did little to deter him. Reinforcements arrived, including a police dog, which was unleashed on the frenzied young man. The dog latched onto the assailant's arm, but he seemed to feel no pain, breaking free and injuring himself further. A powerful kick from an officer finally disoriented the attacker long enough to handcuff him. At this moment, the young man claimed he felt unwell, possibly having eaten something bad, before losing consciousness and convulsing. Emergency medical teams transported 4 individuals from the scene. Mrs. Stevens could not be revived, and her husband succumbed to his injuries en route to the hospital due to extensive blood loss from stab wounds and the shock of having his flesh consumed. The injured neighbor who reported the incident survived, but suffered permanent minor motor skill damage to his right hand due to nerve and tendon damage. As for the attacker, he slipped into a coma after ingesting a substance from a bottle in the garage he mistook for alcohol, which turned out to be weed perpetrator. He suffered severe burns to his esophagus and stomach, spent several days on the brink of life and death, but was ultimately saved by medical professionals. Fragmented memories. Austin spent nearly 2 weeks in a coma before he finally regained consciousness and was able to give his account, claiming he remembered nothing about the events of that day. Gradually, he began to recall the dinner at the restaurant and the argument with his father, after which he walked away. He then described seeing a ghost-like figure that led him through dark alleys and unfamiliar neighborhoods until a light appeared in the distance. The source of the light turned out to be a lantern near the Stevens garage, where the homeowner was preparing a barbecue and taking out food. When his presence startled the woman, she called for help. Austin admitted to striking her several times and then, drawing a knife, declared he would rid her of evil. At that moment, a man, neighbor Jeffrey Fisher, attacked him, whom Austin perceived as a demon, and he retaliated with the knife. After Fisher ran to seek help, Harrouff continued to assault the woman until she showed no signs of life. He then noticed a bottle, mistook its contents for alcohol, and drank about half. Soon after, he heard a dog barking and a man's voice. The homeowner had returned, shocked by the scene. Austin claimed no memory of what happened next, at least according to his own statements. Initially, there was speculation that Austin was under the influence of potent narcotics, which might explain his aggression and insensitivity to pain. However, when he was tested at the hospital, his blood showed no traces of drugs, medication, or alcohol. This led to the conclusion that Austin might have had a psychotic break, acting without awareness of his actions. Determining the truth of this claim was left to experienced psychiatrists. Between the courtroom and psychiatric care, the case of Austin Harrouff gained widespread media attention due to its unprecedented brutality and ambiguity. The children of the deceased couple, as well as the relatives of the injured neighbor, were convinced that the young man was feigning insanity and memory lapses in order to be declared incompetent and avoid severe punishment. This sentiment was shared by the majority of those following the case. The state-appointed psychological and psychiatric expert, Dr. Landrum, noted in his report that Mr. Harrouff's mental illness led to an acute psychotic episode, resulting in the death of 2 people. However, the prosecutor argued in court that he did not believe the defendant met the legal definition of insanity at the time of committing the crime. There were suggestions that the young man's mental health had deteriorated due to his experiments with various narcotics, steroid use, and difficulties in socializing with peers, which he had experienced since school. However, at the time of the crime, he was clean, with no traces of illegal substances or alcohol found in his blood, indicating that the reasons for his aggressive behavior lay elsewhere. During one of the court hearings, Austin's father revealed that there was at least one confirmed case of schizophrenia in their family, and he feared that this severe illness had been passed on to his son. It's worth noting that the student was suspected of having a rather rare disorder known as clinical lycanthropy delusion. Such a diagnosis could explain why the young man behaved like a wild beast and was impervious to pain, but none of the psychiatrists examining the defendant confirmed it. After treatment, Austin was transferred to jail, but the case remains unresolved to this day. The young man is still awaiting trial, and his lawyers insist that he is mentally ill. Meanwhile, The relatives of the deceased couple and the injured man have expressed hope in interviews that Harrouff will be found competent and sentenced to death for his heinous acts. The Sumner family case. Buried alive. The worst betrayal is the betrayal of a loved one who enjoyed boundless love and trust. However, despite all the pain, bitterness, resentment, and disappointment, many still cope with it and go on with their lives. But what if the betrayal is learned on the deathbed, and the realization of this becomes the last thing that a person experiences in his life? That's what the horrifying story of the Sumner family is about. This case struck to the heart and brought to tears even experienced criminalists with a huge experience, which in their practice have seen everything, except that the subhumans who committed this heinous crime, despite the initial death sentence passed on them, are still alive and are actively trying to appeal the court's decision. But let's look at this story from the beginning and try to understand how it came to be that a young girl, whom the spouses Sumner loved and cared for as their own daughter, decided to deal with them in the most brutal way. High school sweetheart. James, or simply Reggie Sumner, and Carol Alford were born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina. They were the same age, knew each other since childhood, went to the same school, and were in the same grade. Over time, their friendship and childhood affection grew into sympathy. School children themselves did not notice how they began to get closer. In 1959, when the teenagers were 15 years old, a romantic relationship between them, and they began dating. Friends noted how beautiful and harmonious it was a couple, and in the home archives of James and Carol later in life kept their joint photos, where they are young, happy, and ahead as it seemed to them at the time. They are waiting for a long and happy life. For both of them, it was the first time in their lives that their feelings were strong and mutual. The young people were practically inseparable, both in and out of school, and seriously considered getting married as soon as they turned 18. Their parents approved of their children's choice and were not against their marriage, but life had a very different outcome: a long separation. In 1962, the lovers graduated from high school, but they did not have time to get married because a few months later, James was called up for military service in the Army. He and Carol decided to postpone the celebration until his return home and also agreed to write each other regular letters. Time passed, the separation dragged on, and in the mid-60s, the young man was sent to a hot spot in Vietnam, after which contact with him was cut off. Carol didn't even know if her lover was alive because he stopped writing to her. Carol decided to continue her studies, at the same time getting a job at the Charleston Air Force Base. A few years later, she married, but the first marriage soon broke up, and the spouses did not have common children. In 1975, the young woman married a second time to a certain Richard Alford, from whom in 1977 gave birth to their only child, a daughter Rhonda. However, the second marriage was also unsuccessful because the spouse abused hot drinks and regularly raised his hand on his wife. Toward the middle of the 80s, Carol could not stand the constant abuse from her husband, took her daughter, and filed for divorce. But Richard did not leave his ex-wife alone and literally pursued her, trying to spoil her life. And in 1987, he succeeded. He bought a handgun with ammunition, and after another reception of a large portion of alcohol, went to the ex-spouse to deal with her. Alford rang the doorbell, and Carol, unsuspecting, opened it for him. Behind her in the room was 10-year-old Rhonda, but the presence of his daughter did nothing to deter the drunken father, who pulled out a gun and shot Carol several times right in front of the child. He then got into his car, drove to a deserted area, pulled out his gun, and fired the remaining bullet into his temple, dying on the spot. Carol was lucky to survive because the sound of gunshots and the desperate cries of the child were heard by neighbors, who promptly called an ambulance and the police. The young woman was on the verge of death. She lost a lot of blood, and for several days her condition was assessed as critical. She underwent a number of complex operations, blood transfusions, and gradually recovered. Except Carol became completely blind in her right eye and was left disabled for life. Toward the end of the 90s, her health again seriously deteriorated. She did not feel well, noticeably lost weight, suffered from severe pain and weakness. Having undergone a full examination in the hospital, she heard a disappointing diagnosis: liver cancer. As it turned out then, in 1987, when doctors were fighting for her life, her body was accidentally carried the hepatitis C virus, which Carol did not suspect and did not treat the disease. As a result, the virus that affected her liver destroyed it for years, leading to cancer. However, thanks to treatment and properly selected supportive therapy, Carol's condition was stabilized. She had to take her prescribed medications daily for the rest of her life, as well as undergo regular medical checkups to make timely adjustments to her treatment. Carol lost her job at the Air Force Base after suffering severe gunshot wounds. Now that cancer was added to her disappointing diagnoses, she was unable to work physically or be on her feet for long periods of time. So Carol took a job as a call center operator for a cable TV company in her hometown of Charleston. As for James, once in Vietnam, he didn't have a chance to report for a long time. The war dragged on, the man was severely wounded, nearly losing his leg, and spent an extended period of time in the hospital. His name was mistakenly included in the lists of the dead, so even his relatives thought that he was no longer alive. Sumner was lucky enough to survive and return home years later. By that time, the connection with Carol was long lost. She had changed her place of residence, married, and also believed that her first lover had died in a hot spot. Soon, James married, but because of the injuries he received in the war, developed diabetes and a number of other chronic diseases, he was never able to become a father. A few years later, the marriage broke up, and he has lived alone ever since. James took a job as a simple laborer on the local railroad, and no longer expected from life pleasant surprises. The voice sounds painfully familiar. In the fall of 2000, Carol was having a normal workday answering phones and giving advice to customers. When the young woman answered another such call, she heard a familiar voice that sent shivers down her spine. She immediately recognized her first high school love, but she was afraid to make a mistake because she thought James was dead. Carol answered all the customers' questions and then suddenly turned to him, saying his full name. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then the man timidly asked how she knew his name. Carol burst into tears in response and replied that she was the girl he had dated in high school that he had once wanted to marry. For the next few minutes, they both just cried into the tube, unable to utter a word. Then they found out that they still lived in their hometown and agreed to meet the next evening. The meeting 38 years later. According to Rhonda's recollection, her mother came home from work that day excited, looking like a lovesick schoolgirl and talking nonstop about James. The next day, Carol prepared for the date, trying on dresses, doing her hair and makeup. Carol realized that she was no longer the young beauty James Sumner remembered her to be, but she wanted to look good and win back the heart of the man she had once been in love with. It was an exciting meeting for both of them, for the couple had not seen each other for 38 years. They talked about everything in the world and could not talk enough, told each other about the joys and sorrows of their lives, about failed marriages, about work, about health problems, and remembered how happy they were once together. Their old feelings flared up again. James and Carol were eager to make up for the lost years. They began to see each other every day, and after just a couple of weeks, they decided to move in together and start living together. 5 months later, the couple married, and Carol moved into her husband's home in the Riverland Terrace neighborhood. Family life and troublesome neighbors. The couple first resided in their native Charleston, South Carolina. They were in love, happy, engaged in the arrangement of everyday life, and reverently cared for each other because both were not old and had health problems. Next to the couple lived the Cole family, with whom James had been acquainted for many years. The head of their family, named Stephen, had also once fought in Vietnam, was severely wounded, and remained confined to a wheelchair. His wife, Natalie, disappeared at work, and afterwards did not hurry home at all, preferring to spend time in the company of friends, somewhere in the bar. Their daughter Tiffany was left to her own devices from a young age, often hanging around on the street with nothing to do, and no money for even small pocket money. When James and Carol first started living together, Tiffany was still in high school, and good-natured Carol immediately sympathized with the neighbor girl. She genuinely felt sorry for the schoolgirl, who was actually unwanted by her own mother. Carol, for 5 years, in every possible way, patronized Tiffany, invited her to her family lunches and dinners, where delicious food, periodically bought the girl clothes, and even gave money for small expenses. Carol treated her like her own daughter, surrounded her with care and attention. When in 2004, the Sumners decided to sell their car brand Chevrolet Lumina minivan, Tiffany asked if she could buy it from them in installments. Since the girl had no money and she needed the car like air, the couple decided to give her the vehicle for next to nothing. The agreed amount was ridiculous, which was divided into a dozen payments and stretched them over a whole year, a forced move, and a mysterious disappearance. In early 2005, the Sumners decided to move to the sunny state of Florida. It was a forced measure because the health of both spouses deteriorated markedly, and doctors recommended that they move south and closer to the ocean. By that time, they were both retired, so they decided to make a drastic change in their lives. Carol and James sold their spacious home in Charleston and acquired real estate in Jacksonville, the largest and most populous city in Florida. They also purchased a new Lincoln Town car. The couple were extremely happy and settled in a new place, making plans for their future life together. Every day, Carol called her adult daughter Rhonda, to whom she told her about everything that was going on in her life, shared her thoughts and plans. Therefore, the girl was very surprised and excited when one day, in June 2005, her mother did not call her and did not answer her call. At first, Rhonda chased the bad thoughts away from her and hoped that everything was all right with her mom and her husband and that they would call her back soon. But the next day, the situation was no different. Rhonda called her mother and James's cell phones every half hour, but the phones were now unavailable, and the answering machine on her home phone went off. But all messages went unanswered. On the third day, Rhonda decided to drive herself to another state to see if her mother and stepfather were okay. She left early in the morning and was on the road for about 5 hours before she reached the Sumners' home. The first thing Rhonda noticed was the absence of a car, but that was only the first oddity. When the girl went to the front door, she found that the door was ajar. The house was quiet and there was a light on in one of the rooms, even though the sun was shining brightly outside. Rhonda called loudly for her mother and James, but there was no answer. Then she went into the kitchen, where she saw a table set for 2 with food that looked like it had been there for at least 3 days. It looked as if the owners had gathered for dinner, but had suddenly abandoned the meal and gone somewhere else. In addition, the house itself was a mess, with things strewn about and some doors and cupboards left open. It seemed as if something had been searched for. But what was it? And who was it? In the couple's bedroom on the bedside table, there were some medications that were vital to them. There were their mother's cancer pills, which she took 3 times a day, and a bottle of insulin, which James took by the hour. In addition, the couple's cell phones were completely dead. Rhonda realized that without their medications and cell phones, her mother and stepfather could not leave the house, let alone leave their home for a long time. So she immediately contacted the police to report the incident. Strange imposters. The couple and their car were promptly put on the wanted list, and all bank cards belonging to Carol and James were blocked the same day. The first few days of the search yielded no results, and it was not possible to find the Sumners themselves or any witnesses hot on the trail. However, on June 12th, several events occurred at once, which allowed the police to get on the trail of the criminals. First, a man called one of the banks, who introduced himself as Mr. James Sumner, and complained that his card was blocked and he could not withdraw cash. Upon checking the card information, the bank employee immediately suspected something wrong. He offered Mr. Sumner to contact personally the nearest bank branch to settle the problem, but the man simply hung up. At the same time, almost a few minutes later, from the same number, but already in another bank, a woman called from the same bank who introduced herself as Mrs. Carol Sumner and reported a similar problem with the blocking of the card. When offered to come to the bank in person, she categorically refused, saying that she could not do so for health reasons, but was in dire need of money right now and asked to return access to her savings, which of course was refused. The information about the calls, as well as the recordings of the phone calls themselves, were immediately handed over to the police. On the same day at the station, they were played to Rhonda, who stated with certainty that the voices did not belong to her mother and stepfather. This was obvious from the beginning because both spouses were in their 60s and the voices sounded too young. The police immediately assumed that the imposters are directly related to the disappearance of the Sumners, and they either kidnapped the couple and hold them somewhere forcibly, or killed them, having previously extorted information about bank accounts and cards. The search. A few days later, the missing couple's car was found abandoned on a deserted road in a wooded area. No traces of blood and struggle were found in the cabin, but in the trunk experts found hair and sweat marks, which, as it turned out, belonged to both spouses. It became clear that the owners had been taken away in the trunk of their own car, and there was little chance of finding them alive. When the police checked the couple's bank transactions, it turned out that money had been withdrawn from their cards several times after the Sumners had stopped contacting their daughter. After reviewing the ATM surveillance footage, it was discovered that the money had been withdrawn by a young man who could not be immediately identified. In addition, a request was made to trace all calls from the number from which the imposters called the bank. The SIM card itself, as it turned out, was bought without a contract, with prepaid time, shortly before the disappearance of the spouses. It was not possible to establish the name of the buyer in this case, but it was learned that on June 6th, a call was made from this number to a car rental company. As it turned out, a guest of one of the hotels rented a car brand Mazda RX-8 in the name of Tiffany Cole, and it was on this car later, an unknown young man drove to ATMs where he withdrew money from cards belonging to the Sumners. He withdrew $1,000 from the woman's card and almost $3,000 from her husband's card. Thanks to beacons built into all rental cars to track their location, investigators were able to find out that the already mentioned Mazda RX-8 parked at a hotel in Charleston. There was promptly dispatched a capture team, which literally broke into the room where the attackers were resting, celebrating their impunity. Young thugs. The room was literally littered with packages and receipts from various stores, and among the purchases were clothes, gadgets, video games, cosmetics, perfumes, and a lot of expensive alcohol. Inside was a girl and two guys who were clearly not expecting visitors from the police. They were 23-year-old Tiffany Cole, her 24-year-old boyfriend named Michael J. Jackson, and 19-year-old Alan Lindell Wade. The young men looked surprised, confused, and even scared as handcuffs were snapped on their wrists. All three were taken to the police station and placed in different rooms for questioning, but at first they pretended not to understand what they were accused of or simply remained silent. A search of the room also turned up the Sumners' bank cards, a laptop belonging to the couple, some of Carol's jewelry, James's expensive coin collection, the keys to their Lincoln Town car, and pawn shop receipts in the name of Tiffany Cole. As it turned out, part of the stolen jewelry Mrs. Sumner, Tiffany managed to pawn, and the money spent with friends. After several hours of interrogation, when the irrefutable evidence found in the hotel room was presented, Tiffany was the first to speak. The girl sobbed and claimed that she and her friends had robbed the elderly couple, but did nothing else to them, and then went on the run and started spending other people's money. She also admitted that there was another guy with them, 19-year-old Bruce Kent Nixon, to whom they paid $300 for help and never saw him again. As it turned out, Bruce really agreed to go to the crime, for they promised him a fixed amount, and after that he spent all the money on illegal substances. Finding the guy was not difficult because he lived in the same Charleston and did not even think about running or hiding. He was arrested right at his parents' house, a careless phrase and a devious plan. Bruce once realized how the committed crime could turn out for him and therefore agreed to cooperate with the police to avoid the death penalty. What the young criminal told caused horror and frost on the skin. It all began in May 2005, when Tiffany went to the Sumners to give them the next payment for the car bought 6 months ago. The girl always went to them personally because hospitable Carol and James invited her to stay for a night or a few days, fed her delicious food, and even spoiled her with gifts. If she came with friends, there was always room for them in the house and at the table. This time, Tiffany arrived with her new boyfriend, and both of them were kindly invited to dinner. And since the time was late, the couple stayed overnight at the Sumners' house. During the meal, The Sumners talked about how they settled in the new place, and Carol inadvertently mentioned that they had almost $100,000 left after the sale of the house in Charleston, so they could live for themselves in their old age, not deny themselves anything, and not worry about anything. With that phrase, Carol effectively sentenced herself and her husband to death. Tiffany and Michael looked at each other, and during the night, while at the couple's house, they began to make plans on how they could get their hands on this impressive sum of money. In the morning, they said goodbye and returned to South Carolina, where in a couple of weeks they found accomplices, distributed the roles and responsibilities of each, and began to realize the plan, the heinous confessions of criminals. On June 6th, Tiffany rented an inconspicuous car, and Bruce and Alan stole 4 shovels from somewhere. Together they drove to the suburbs of Jacksonville, where they chose a deserted spot in the woods and began digging a deep hole that would become the grave of the Sumner couple. On the morning of July 8th, Tiffany bought rope and duct tape at a hardware store, which she gave to her accomplices. That evening, Bruce and Alan knocked on the door of the prospective victim's home, pretended to need help, and asked to be allowed to make one call from their home phone. Carol thought these young men were strange, but she let them in nonetheless, figuring they really needed help. Once inside, they immediately attacked the defenseless woman and her husband, who came running to her screams, threatening them with a toy gun. The couple's hands and feet were tightly bound with duct tape, blindfolded, and questioned about money and valuables in the house. Under torture and death threats, the couple gave the intruders all the details of their bank accounts and the PIN codes of their cards, hoping that their lives would be spared. But as soon as the bandits received the necessary information, 2 more people entered the house. They helped drag the couple into the backyard of the house and stuff them into the trunk of their family car. Driving the Lincoln, and in the front seat were Alan and Bruce, and behind them, in a rented Mazda RX-8, were Tiffany and Michael. In case they encountered a police patrol on the way, who would have intended to stop the car with the couple in the trunk. The second car should have diverted their attention to themselves by accelerating sharply or flagrantly breaking the rules. However, there was no one in their path, and both cars made it to the scene unharmed. In the trunk, James managed to free his arm and removed the bandage and duct tape from his face, and also from his wife's face so she wouldn't suffocate. But there was nothing else they had time to do. What was their surprise, bewilderment, and shock when the trunk lid opened, and the couple saw among their captors Tiffany and her boyfriend, who had recently visited them. The Sumners were led several dozen meters through the woods to a grave prepared for them, after which they simply pushed them there. The couple desperately pleaded for their lives, but the young criminals decided otherwise, killing the couple in the most brutal way imaginable, burying them alive. According to Bruce, they covered them with earth for about an hour, and the whole time the bound elderly people cried, confessed their love to each other, and said goodbye. As the examination later showed, the spouses died of suffocation, and in their mouths, respiratory tracts, and even stomach were found pieces of soil in which they were buried. Having finished their gruesome work, the outlaws abandoned the Lincoln in the woods and returned to town in a rented car. They went to the Sumner house, where they took all the valuable things they could find, and then returned to South Carolina and began to spend the loot. However, after 2 days, the stolen cards were blocked, and after another 4, all participants in the crime were taken into custody, trial, and conviction. The only one who from the beginning fully admitted his guilt and agreed to cooperate with the investigation, hoping for leniency, was Bruce Nixon. It was he who showed the burial place of the spouses and told in detail about everything that happened on that terrible night. Tiffany claimed that the initiator of the crime was her boyfriend Michael, who had lost his mind when he heard about the fabulous amount of money that remained with the Sumners after the sale of the house. Her lawyer insisted that the girl was a wingman and was not directly involved in the murder herself. Jackson and Lindell preferred to remain silent, but the collected evidence spoke eloquently for them. The jury did not believe in the innocence of Tiffany Cole because she took part in the development of the criminal plan, rented a car, and came up with a diversionary maneuver if they suddenly chased by the police, helped dig a grave for the spouses, and after renting stolen items in the pawn shop and happy to spend the money.
This was evidenced by a lot of photos taken by her in the purchased clothes and in a limousine, which the criminals rented to celebrate their success. As a result, Bruce Nixon was sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to ever be released, and Jackson, Tiffany, and Lindell were given the death penalty. The criminals filed multiple appeals and grievances, but they were all denied, and the sentence remained unchanged, except that in 2023, 18 years after their atrocious crime, that very same death sentence was never carried out.